So I'm gonna warn everyone right off the bat, this is not gonna be a vlog. I'm gonna be sitting here with my wet ass hair on the ground, foot asleep, cats rubbing their head against the camera, making it fall. And I'm just doing a sit down, good old fashioned video. I know most of you have clicked off by now. Clicked. I owe y'all an apology because I was on my game doing my Les Mis vlogs. Spoiler alert, I just finished Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And my intention was to do a vlog for every part of it. There's 5 and I successfully did 3 of them. But the 4th book got really boring at the beginning and I was like, I'll start recording when it gets interesting. And then by that point it just felt like too late in the volume, but then when I started volume 5 I was really espresso depresso, so I didn't feel like filming. Long ass story short, I don't have a vlog for any of these parts, but clearly I read them. I had a lot of quotes that I marked because this book continues to serve tea, and so I just did a quick skim through of a TLDR, what you missed on Glee, and I just want to walk through some of my thoughts. I think that the target audience for this is people who have seen the musical or care about the musical or know the music or a little bit of the storyline, because my reason for reading this is I adore these characters. I have always loved the musical since I was in high school. It made it easier to read, to kind of know what's coming up. Even though, yes, I agree that the reputation of the book is that he does not shut the fuck up about certain things. I was also surprised at how it wasn't that bad. Some parts were really difficult to get through, but overall, just the characters in this book absolutely shined through. I wanted to go through some of the things that I read in the last 2 volumes. The 4th one is called, in English, Saint Denis. In French, something like Saint-Denis.
Saint-Denis.
And then the 5th volume is called Jean Valjean. So it comes back full circle just to finish out his storyline. And these 2 chapters are primarily just the barricade, a lot of death. I just want to walk through some of the things that surprised me, some of the things that I liked, some of the things I didn't like, and then maybe just do a final wrap up of my thoughts on the book, since this is the last time you'll be hearing about it until my favorites of the year. So we start out in volume 4 with Victor Hugo has a really good analysis of revolutions, and something that I think is interesting that he does, and maybe this is more relevant when we get into character deaths, is as Victor Hugo is introducing a concept, he will stop there and do a monologue about revolutions or this character's ideology or whatever it may be. Events will ensue that involve that thing, and then it's never touched on again. Like, there's no post-events analysis afterward. It's just like, this thing is terrible, we hate it, anyway, it happened, bye. I don't know, in some ways it was a little bit jarring that it was like, wait, this person just died, or this concept was just introduced and we're just not gonna return to that after it happens. After a while you get used to it. But anyway, the beginning of the book, volume 4, begins with talking about revolutions and why they are necessary. And honestly, I was expecting this to give a lot more of a history of the revolutions of the 1830s. I don't know if there's just one. Based on how much information we got about the Battle of Waterloo and some of the earlier Napoleonic Wars, we got like literal drawings of the battlefield when it comes to Waterloo. So I was expecting when it would start to talk about the revolutions that were happening a couple decades later, we would also get a very intense primer on why people were upset, why there were revolutions, why the students were revolutionaries. And there is that, but I felt like I needed supplementary resources, and it's been a couple months since I did that, and now I've already completely forgotten. So that's why reading classics like this is sometimes a bit of a kick to the jaw for me, because I'm like, I learned a lot while I was reading it. I can't tell you anything about it now. I did like the analysis he did on revolutions. There's a difference between an uprising and a revolution is a revolution because it must be. One thing that continued to astound me is that Marius is not as buddy-buddy with the ABC Cafe like all of his student friends as you'd think he would be based on any other adaptation of this. He pretty much is just obsessed with Cosette, and that's like his entire role in the book. And also, Marius is not as political as the others. Like, he goes on like a rant about education later on in the book, and obviously he and his grandfather is like a staunch royalist. They have always butted heads in this book because of politics. He crashes with, I think he pronounced his name Courfeyrac. Courfeyrac, you take the watch. They may attack before it's light. That's like his only mention in the musical, so every time I hear his name, I just think of that. I didn't realize that Courfeyrac being his roommate made them like super big besties, almost like more than Marius and Enjolras were besties, which surprised me. You don't really get a sense of Courfeyrac in the musical or the movie. Like, I don't think I could even point out to you which one he is in any of those groups. Like, they were kind of a unit together. That was another thing that took me off guard, but you've really come to love Courfeyrac and the dynamic between all the boys, because emphasis on boys. I love that there was like a little mention thrown in that he and the boys were roomies.
And they were roommates.
But then we get a lot more of Eponine and Marius in this book, which is kind of crazy because, again, every piece of media about Les Mis really plays up the fact that it's this unrequited love, and Eponine and him are like best friends, but she's friend zoned, when in reality, in the book, anytime that Eponine encounters Marius, obviously she's like, that's my man, I'm gonna follow you around like a basset hound. But then Marius would be like, and who's that? He's only met her at this point a couple of times. Honestly, this book makes you hate Marius a little bit, because he's just so love-stricken with Cosette. Like, that's really all that drives him. So anytime Eponine is with him or sees him, all he does is think about her or talk about her or use Eponine as a means to get to her. And she's fine with being that for him as long as he'll talk to her. I know we all relate to Eponine on so many levels because of things like that, but it is really sad. And this book unpacks a lot of that, where anytime she sees him, she will literally joke around and be like, you don't even know who I am, right? You don't even remember my name. And he doesn't. We'll talk about her in a little bit because things will happen, but even in the correspondence between like Cosette moving away and Eponine helps him find her, she is just a tool to him, and it is so sad. And I've read this like piece of analysis, it was on Spark Notes, I'm not sitting here reading literary journals on Les Mis, but it was talking about Eponine being such a caring and kind person despite being a Thénardier, and how just like absolutely rotted her mom and dad were, and being able to like flip that script and come back around and be a good person from that was just unheard of. You just grow to love her, except for Marius. He did not love her at all. But then because Eponine gives Marius Cosette's new address, now begins all the chapters of Cosette and Marius in the garden together. The whole Rue Plumet chapters, Cosette sneaking down to the garden and Marius like leaving her notes, and then they sit together and Jean Valjean doesn't know about any of it. It's very interesting how Les Mis tackles like every subject, because you'll go from the beginning of this book talking about the Revolution of 1830 for 20 pages, and then there's just this heart-melting, gut-wrenching descriptions of young love and happiness, their relationship blooming, and then finally being able to talk to one another, because before he was just seeing her walk by and he's like, damn, I hit that. And emphasis also on she's 15 and he's 20. Different times back then, so I'll let it slide, but that was in the background of my mind the entire time this was going on. I was like, ooh. Cosette is always such a bright light, and never in a forced way where it's like, this is just a character, this is a woman written by a man who's just there to serve a purpose, and she's just this virginal angel. It really does fit in with the story, and she feels authentic. Is it insta-love? Absolutely. But the way that Jean Valjean, oh my god, Victor Hugo writes these guys, they just seem so perfect for each other, and they're so sweet. The chapters where they're in the garden together are just so vivid and so special. But then in contrast, like I said, it's just, this book is great at bookending horror, conflict, love, relationships, happiness, family, people dying. So we move from all those garden scenes to General Lamarck's funeral, which did happen in the movie and the book, so I was like, I'm there. I'm right back with you. I did not realize though that General Lamarck, I thought because he died and they like activated their revolution because of his funeral, I was like, he must be a guy they hated, and now they're like, huh, bye. General Lamarck, he was all for the people and rights and stuff, so they were using it as like a, aren't we sad he died? Shouldn't he come back? Spoiler alert, Marius isn't even there. He's off with Cosette, or off like mourning Cosette because she's moving. Shit goes down. They start the barricade. Marius is nowhere to be fucking found. He literally hears like a random person be like, oh my god, the barricade, and then he's like, well, guess I should go. And then there's a lot of discussion about like where the barricade is, which one thing I didn't realize is that the ABC Cafe was the barricade. Maybe duh, but it was there. And I found like a map on Tumblr that showed the old roads that used to be in that area, because so much of this is literally Google Maps. He would be like, oh yeah, and then Javert was walking down the Rue de whatever, and then he came up to this bridge. I was literally on Google Maps like, okay, and he's going over there, and then he's going right here. Geographically, this book is very easy to follow because everything still exists for the most part, except the random street corner where the barricade happened. There is a photo. It's like the only photo that someone took where it's like, this is where it would have been. It's like the first and second story of like a corner restaurant. And if you look at the area now on Google Maps, it's like an alleyway, just the sides of buildings. I'm like, this should be a monument. I should see a barricade. Anyway, I have it marked on my Google Maps because I'm gonna go one day. I'm gonna be like, this is where it happened. Vive la France. The barricade chapters were the first time where there were some direct quotes from the musical. I guess the other way around, from the book that went to the musical. Because for the longest time, I was expecting that more of the themes from the music would come directly from the story and the writing and the actual sentences. And there were like similar themes, obviously, but there wasn't anything that was like directly grafted from the dialogue. The barricade chapters though, it started to, I would be like, I recognize that word. I recognize that sentence. So there were certain things like when Marius finally shows up to the barricade and everyone's shooting at each other and he gets a whole bucket of gunpowder and starts to light it on fire. He's like, I'll do it. And the guard is like, and yourself with it? And he goes, and myself with it. And that's a direct line in the movie as well. I was like, it's like when you see the title of the book and the book, it was like one of those moments. I don't know at what point this was revealed, but it was around the barricade. Tell me if I'm wrong, because I haven't Googled this, but there's a detail thrown in about Enjolras looking out as the cannons finally get there. He's looking at one of the cannoneers, or whatever that's called, the guy who does the cannon, and it's like, dude has the same hair color, dude has the same complexion, he sheds a tear, pulls the trigger. That was a very disrespectful noise. I feel like he was hinting that Enjolras' brother was part of the army and he had to kill his own brother in this struggle. And I may have way misunderstood that, but that's how I interpreted it, and I was like gutted. And of course we cannot not mention this chapter without talking about Eponine coming back around. So I kind of already set up my dilemma with it. The last thing Eponine does before she dies is give Marius a letter from Cosette that she was like selfishly holding on to because she was like, yeah, we'll be together. But then once she saves his life, takes a bullet for him, etc., she's like, fine, here's your bitch. Marius like immediately stops being sad about her. He's like, oh my god, my bitch wrote, bye. And then it goes back to what I was saying earlier about once something happens, it's rarely mentioned again. So it's at this point in the book, it is like, this person dies, done. This person dies, done. It's like never an aw, and we miss them, and aw, isn't that sad that she died? It's a very quick get out of here. You're getting shuttled away once you're already out of the story. And then end of book 4. So by the time you get to the final volume, we're still at the barricade. The book is called Jean Valjean because Jean Valjean enters the barricade. And his entrance is so jaw-dropping. It's so good. He like shows up right when they needed him and it's like, yes, there's my man! And for a lot of the story, you see Jean Valjean, obviously he's a strong character, but he's pretty passive. And I almost struggle to say that word because he has done so much for Cosette and he's so strong and so capable. But him being at the barricade, it feels like a total 180 from everything you've seen him do so far. It's like, holy shit, you're participating in that? Okay. It's seeming a little bit criminal of you. I cannot get over the scene where Javert sees Jean Valjean at the barricade though, and he's like, let me go kill this bitch. And by the way, Javert's entire personality in this book is just laws. There's nothing else he cares about in the entire world. Like, he's a virgin loser who only cares about, like, he is ACAB to the nth degree. He doesn't care about anything except that's the law. When he sees Jean Valjean and Jean Valjean is like, let me kill that bitch instead of you guys, Javert literally looks up and says, that is just. In his own death, he's not willing to argue, please save my life, because he's like, nope, that's the just thing to do. You could offer Javert $1 million to fix the French government, name something else, cure cancer. He would have not accepted that. He would not let Jean Valjean go. Like, his entire purpose in the book is just follow the rules. It doesn't matter what God says, what morality says. Javert's, what is that even called? Just like perseverance throughout this book. Because at this point, it's been like 700 pages of Javert doing the same old bullshit of, oop, almost got him, oop, he got away, oop, almost got him. Like, the cat and mouse chase in this book goes crazy. After that is pretty much the time where everyone starts getting killed. So Gavroche's death was very difficult to read because he's like, he acts like an adult, but he still has like childlike playfulness, and he's like singing a song when he dies, which is so sad. And then the final surge at the barricade is that the French army has finally gotten over the barricade. They're cornering them in the wine shop, and pretty much at this point everyone is dead except for Enjolras, who like goes up to the second floor to the very last second hold out hope. And one thing that they didn't do, which this was like absolutely gagging, in the book Enjolras goes upstairs and Grantaire is there in the corner, which for the entire book, Grantaire is one of the guys that's in their student group. I don't even know that he's an active current student, but he's described as just like the contrarian, the drunkard. I was just saying Marius didn't really feel like he was part of the crew. Grantaire definitely was not part of the crew. Like, he did not care about politics. He just liked Enjolras. He was attracted by the passion, even though he was like, I don't care about your barricade, why would I do that? He showed up anyway and got so drunk he passed out at a table upstairs, and by the time that the gunfire is following Enjolras into that second story, he wakes up from his drunken stupor, and for the first and last time in the book is like, Vive la France, bitch. Like, he leans into the revolution, and his last dying words are in support of that, and he and Enjolras get taken out together. The way that Enjolras is just described with such innocence, but just wise beyond his years, and I know that this, I've said before that this book talks a lot about love, and in some ways, like, obviously love between characters like Jean Valjean and Cosette and Marius. Enjolras is portrayed as being a loving person, but his love is for the country of France and her people. He has sacrificed love in other areas of his life, like they make fun of him for never being with women and not caring about relationships, but it's like his love is his cause. I'm getting chills. It's so good, but it's so sad. And I was kind of hoping for a movie moment where they get shot, he falls out the window and the flag falls out, but in typical Victor Hugo style, it was kind of just like, and he shot and died, and then moving on. So we moved on real quick from that to none other than the beautiful sewer chapters. The sewer chapters were not bad. So I don't know if I was just talking to two people who both agreed that they hated that part of the book, but I thought it was actually interesting. Like, there were a lot worse tangents that Victor Hugo went off on. By the end of this book, I will say the worst tangents were the Battle of Waterloo, and then there's another chapter that talks about Marius's grandfather and like his history with the royal party and like why he's a royalist. That one was real boring, didn't care about that. But the sewer chapters were interesting. Was I reading about shit for a while? Yeah! The whole thing about Les Mis is even when he does go off on random tangents, all the chapters are like 3 pages long, so it's fine. But yeah, you just get these amazing descriptions of Jean Valjean like dragging Marius through the sewer, and the emphasis of Jean Valjean's strength, like physical strength, will never cease to astound me, just because he also has such mental strength that it's like this character really was superhuman, and he's carrying this simp through the sewers. Like, Marius low-key is like the worst character in this book if you think about it, maybe after Thénardier. But they get out of the sewer, and guess who's sitting outside waiting? Javert. Which, this is the first time Javert was portrayed as having an emotional side, because Jean Valjean is like, I will let you take me, I would like to go see my bitch, and I would like to go give this man to his grandfather. And Javert is like, okay. Is that the same dude? Okay, sure. But Javert lets him drop Marius off at his grandfather's, which that entire section was so good, because for the entire book, by the way, Marius's grandfather is like almost a central character to the book, and he's just completely excluded from any of the adaptations I've seen. His grandfather is like 90 years old and is this old guy who always was like, we hate Napoleon, yay, kings. So Marius and him never really talked, but there's so many good chapters about when Marius would be there with his grandfather externally would be like, your generation is but then internally he loved Marius so much and just didn't know how to express that, and he just was so outwardly angry, but inwardly he was like, and that is my angel child, and even though I don't approve of his father, I have no one else and I'm obsessed with him. Whenever Marius gets dropped off as like basically a dead body, his grandfather is like, oh my god, I spent so much of my life hating this kid and like making him think I hated him and causing all this drama and strife, like he's dead now, and how am I ever gonna make up for that time? After the moment where he sees Marius like on his deathbed, he just has a complete change up where he's like, actually, that's my son, and I don't care our differences. I'm done with politics. That's almost driven me from him. From now on, he's the love of my life. I live to see him happy. And it was just such a sweet switch up, and I was so happy for him to undergo that transformation. And there's several chapters after that that are just the internal struggle with Javert, which some of the internal monologue chapters of these characters to me is more interesting than the chapters where there's like dialogue and stuff, which is not typically my preference. This chapter particularly about Javert just walking through the streets for the first time in his life at a loss for what to do in this situation, because honestly I was a bit confused for a while. Having just seen the movie and, you know, listening to the soundtrack, I'm like, how do we get from such extremes of I finally have him in my grasp, I can turn him in, and actually JK, time to die. Spoiler alert, Javert commits suicide. The chapters where he is musing in his own head about why he can no longer exist was so interesting and illuminated that topic so much. For this whole book, Javert is not led by God or morality or any sense of like social good or bad, as I've said. But for the first time, he's at this conundrum where Jean Valjean just spared him his life. So from a moral perspective, he owes him. And how could he turn Jean Valjean in when he is indebted to him? But also, how could he not turn him in? Because that's his job. Like, this has been a wanted man for 15 years. So he, for the first time, is like, holy shit, there's like a higher power here that's like, do I follow what's right for us on Earth, or do I follow what's right that's in the law book? And those chapters were so well written. This entire chapter just flips on its head the idea that Jean Valjean is the criminal, but he was the one who was granting him his life, and just the struggle being flipped upside down that Jean Valjean is now this hero, even though in the eyes of the law, he's a criminal and he needs to be like put to death. If Javert were to turn him in, because that is the law, he would then be the person who's committed some great harm. But it was basically just the breaking point of, for his entire life pretty much, for the last, what, 20 years, Jean Valjean was the center of his world and chasing him and getting justice. And now that he was a multifaceted person and he realized that there's not just one answer to everything, there is nuance and there's deliberation. Once you have to stop and think about that, like, he was just entirely unsettled. What was he to do now? To deliver up Jean Valjean was bad. To leave Jean Valjean at liberty was bad. In the first case, the man of authority fell lower than the man of the galleys, and in the second, a convict rose above the law and set his foot upon it. In both cases, dishonor for him, Javert. And the one thing that kills me, he did leave a note. He writes a letter at like one of the police outposts called "A Few Observations for the Good of the Service," and it is like 10, oh my gosh, it's like 10 commandments. It's 10 points of contradictions and injustices, like little things he's noticed in his service that he thinks should change, like prisoners take off their shoes and stand barefoot on the flagstones while they're being searched. Many of them cough on their return to the prison. This entails hospital expenses. So it's like he is in a just and like calculated way saying we lose money by doing this and this and this, but if you look at it, he's saying we shouldn't do this because it makes people sick. So he's just snitching on all this stuff where he's like, this is morally wrong, but here's a fact rooted in our contract, in our law, of why we shouldn't be doing this. So his last hurrah to the world is to say, let's fix these 10 things that are within our grasp to fix. And you almost start to like Javert at that point. So it's really, really sad. Was I joking the entire book that he and Jean Valjean needed to make out? Yeah. Sorry, was that confusing for you? Anyway, so I've gone way too long about Javert, but he was just such an interesting villain. And the way that he and Jean Valjean just kept meeting each other throughout the course of this book. Oh my god. But anyway, you're going back to Marius and his grandfather now that Marius is recovering. I am obsessed with that new relationship between him and his grandfather. His grandfather is like dancing around the house and being nice to servants for the first time. So it's almost like a Christmas Carol moment where that interaction with the death, a look into the future, has just completely transformed you. Also at this time, because like Jean Valjean's plotline of being chased has cleared up, like he finally has the room to focus on the present. At the beginning of the book, when Jean Valjean first takes in Cosette, there were these heart-touching moments where he described he's never had a family, he doesn't remember his family, he has no one in the world. Cosette is his daughter for all intents and purposes, and he would do anything to protect her. He loves her so much. And there were just these absolutely heartfelt passages about his pureness of love for her. And you finally have a comeback to that where he sees a positive outlook for her. Marius is surviving. He's able to give her that good news, but it's also tinged with, if I give her to Marius, she's no longer mine. So it's like this happiness for her tinged with a disappointment for himself. The wedding wasn't a remarkable chapter, but there's one part of it where at the end of the dinner feast, Marius's grandfather stands up and he goes off for pages. Like he gets into this long monologue about marriage and happiness. I skipped right to it because I have 4 tabs in one paragraph. This is just the grandfather talking, by the way, all of this. But he stands up at the table and just goes off in this sermon, which, keep in mind, this is the same man who did not open his mouth if not to insult or yell at someone at the beginning of this book. But he's saying, I will give you a bit of advice. Adore each other. Philosophers say, moderate your joys. I say, give rein to your joys. The philosophers talk nonsense. I should like to stuff their philosophy down their gullets. Can there be too many perfumes, too many open rosebuds, too many nightingales singing, too many green leaves, too much aurora in life? Can people love each other too much? Can people enchant each other too much, cajole each other too much, charm each other too much? Can one be too much alive, too happy? Moderate your joys. Ah, indeed, down with philosophers. Make merry. Are we happy because we are good, or are we good because we are happy? I have said that out loud like 5 times since I read that passage. The are we happy because we are good, or are we good because we are happy? This speech changed my life. The fact that it's so well written, but then also coming from someone who used to be so hateful, the payoff of getting through this much of a book and to see how far they've all come is crazy. And again, it was a little bit jarring to have these chapters of happiness and love come after the barricade and the sewers and the arrest and Javert's suicide. Like, all of this was so heartbreaking, but then, like I said, once it happens, you move on. So Marius was like, yay, I'm getting my bitch now. And there was like this is the only time it's happened. There was a little bit of, while he was laying in bed for 6 months recovering, he was like, was that a dream? Losing everyone? Like, he had a little bit of an empty chairs at empty tables moment, but there was never like a full coming to terms with, holy shit, that barricade was for nothing, because all of the talk about revolution came before. One thing that happened at the wedding was Jean Valjean like faked an injury and left so that he wouldn't sign the wedding papers under a false name to like incriminate Cosette. But then he comes back the next morning and immediately confesses everything to Marius of like, I'm an ex-convict, I'm gonna disappear from your lives because I don't want to bring any harm to you guys. If I live with you and go out with you and someone recognizes me, like, that would ruin you all. And the thing that was so interesting, which is like the parts of Javert that like live on in Jean Valjean, and maybe like this is the antithesis of Javert, I don't know. He was saying, I lived a false life, I had a false name, it was given to me, like I knew the guy who I took it from, we were brothers, we pretended to be brothers, so I didn't like take it from him wrongfully, but I lied so that Cosette could have a good life. It was for her. But now if I just lie to protect myself, like I can't have that on my conscience. Because mind you, Marius saw Jean Valjean at the barricade, so he's like, Also, one of the things I was always confused about is like, how does Jean Valjean actually die? Because it feels like it comes out of nowhere. So after Marius starts to push Jean Valjean away and be like, hey, this is my bitch now, like you need to stop coming around, he just stops going to see her, and then eventually stops going outside, and then eventually stops getting out of bed. So it's almost like a death by broken heart kind of thing. So just his deterioration was so hard to watch. Marius finds out that that was actually his savior from the sewers, because Thénardier had come to his house begging for money, which one thing that was unresolved that pissed me off is that for the whole book, Marius is in pursuit of Thénardier because he's like, you saved my dad in the Battle of Waterloo, because Thénardier was literally looting bodies at Waterloo, and he saw General Pontmercy before he died, and in his will, Pontmercy was like, this man saved me, give him everything in the world. And so Marius is going off of his will like, Thénardier's a hero, so he's been looking for him the whole book, but he gives him 20,000 francs because it's never been disproven that he was just a body looter, which is frustrating. But also, you want some tea? You want some details? Thénardier uses that money to bring him and his only remaining living daughter to the Americas, and he becomes a slave trader. Oh my god, like Victor was not holding back shots. He was like, yeah, keep doing that bullshit, and this is the kind of line of work that these people will fall into. Thénardier was descending and descending and descending toward hell. But once Marius and Cosette find out from Thénardier that he was actually the savior down in the sewers, they rush to his apartment. Jean Valjean's death chapter is just such an intense one because you have been with him on his journey for so long, and he's just one of the best fictional characters of all time in my opinion, because he is so unerringly selfless. He is someone that I would gift some therapy, because he's gone for so long being like, I'm alone in life, I don't deserve anything, I just lived to make Cosette happy and now she's yours, so now I have nothing, like I'm ready to die. And the thing that's so startling about his death chapter is that he gets a monologue. In the entire book, he is not long-winded at all. He never goes off on rants and speeches like Marius's grandfather does, but the entire last couple pages is just him talking to Marius and Cosette, and he finally ends it by saying, Cosette, your mother's name was Fantine. She was a saint. She lived so unhappily so that you could be happy. And then he tells her, I want you to have these candlesticks. I know they're just silver, but to me, they're like gold. They're like diamonds. This changed my life. And my number one wish list item with this book is I have this weird obsession with the bishop at the beginning of this book, and especially like the motif and the theme of him having those candlesticks for so long. He was supposed to sell them, but he kept them as a symbol of, I turned my life around, and the goodness of this man was the catalyst for that. And then there's even a mention of the bishop. With his finger, he seemed to indicate a point above his head where one would have said that he saw someone. It is probable, in fact, that the bishop was present at this death agony. And this book was so good! I know I basically just told you like plot point by plot point what happens, but I was decently surprised at how different this was and how much new information and the deeper understanding I got of it. I really read this as closely as I could. I read it on my phone a lot of the time because I constantly had the dictionary and the Wikipedia apps pulled up, and for some reason on Kindle it is so slow to highlight things for it to give you a definition, so I was reading it a lot on mobile. I did end up giving the books 5 stars, which I won't say that all of them are 5-star worthy, especially like the second book with the Battle of Waterloo chapters, and maybe a little bit of like the middle of the book was like, okay, alright. But anything that's lacking in the 5-star department is made up for the fact of my effort in reading this. I think is 5-star worthy. I'm really proud of my close reading, even though I don't have a great memory. I feel like I got a really good understanding of it. And in general, this is not one of those classics that makes you guess. Anything that's left vague will later be explained, and it doesn't have an impossible writing style. It is a very approachable writing style. It is just a lot of story and a lot of context, a lot of history, but this has some of the sweetest and greatest characters in it, some of the most complex relationship between characters. There's so much political talk and things about justice and conflict that even today ring true. Again, the thing I continually am astounded by is that in a book about war and death and loss, this book is also so much about what you gain from loving and peace and harmony. Like, it just has everything. And with that, my friends, Les Miserables. I can't believe I did it. I'm still kind of in shock that I get to read something else now. It's not just this for the rest of my life. So I don't know if you enjoyed this more sitty down chatty video. Hopefully at least 6 of y'all have seen the musical, so you know what I'm talking about. And I hope you also enjoyed gradually watching my hair dry during this. Yeah, it's been like 45 minutes and it's still wet underneath. Cool. All right. Well, what time is it? Woo! 2:30. All right. With that being said, I need to go. I hope you're having a great day. Let me know if this has at all swayed you in wanting to read it, because I do think it would be worth it. Even if you love the musical, but you're not sure if you'd want to read the entire thing, book 1 is so good about Jean Valjean's history. Wow, what a wild ride it has been, but it is over. So there I leave you. It's been nice. It's been fun. Bye. Mwah.